At dinner with my husband's friends, one of them asked how we met. My husband Sean just got this smug grin on his face and said, "Oh, she wouldn't stop texting me. Persistent little thing." And of course they all laughed. He just kept going. "She was obsessed. Honestly, I felt bad saying no." More laughter from his buddies. Then the kicker. "Now she runs after me like a puppy. Guess I'm her best achievement." I just smiled, polished off my drink, and decided right then and there, he'd never, ever humiliate me like that again. "Look at my wife, Jane," Sean announced to his golf buddies as I delivered their drinks on the terrace. His hand gripped my waist, all possessive. "She's like a perfectly trained show dog, knows exactly when to speak, when to smile, when to disappear." He leaned in like he was telling a big secret. "Took years of work, but I finally got her properly housebroken." The men roared with laughter. I just held that practiced smile, but inside, something just snapped. Today would be the last time Sean Whitfield would parade me around like his personal trophy. But before we get to the takedown, let's be real. If you've ever been made to feel small by someone who was supposed to build you up, you know exactly how Jane feels. You know what to do. Hit that subscribe button. It's free, and it helps these stories find people who need to hear them. If you're not subscribing, what's holding you back? Go ahead and let us know in the comments why you're okay with bullies like Sean winning. We'll wait. Now, let's see what happens next. I set down the tray of scotch and sodas with a grace I'd perfected, making sure each glass landed on a coaster without a sound. George Hartford, Sean's closest friend from the firm, raised his glass in a mock toast. "You've got her well trained, Sean. Mine still thinks she has opinions about my portfolio." Another round of laughter. I felt Sean's fingers dig into my hip, his signal, laugh along. So I did. The sound was as hollow as a crystal glass. "Run along now, sweetheart," Sean said, patting my hip like he was rewarding an obedient pet. "The men need to talk business." I turned to leave, catching my reflection in the glass door. Blonde hair, perfectly styled, a designer dress that Sean had picked out last week, makeup so subtle it looked natural, but precise enough to meet his standards. Everything about me was curated, managed, and shrunk down to his specifications. In the kitchen, I just focused on my breathing while loading the dishwasher. Through the window, I could see them on the terrace. Sean, waving his arms around, probably telling another story where I was the punchline. 7 years. 7 years I had played this role, every single day, eroding a little more of who I used to be, before I became Mrs. Sean Whitfield. The clock on the microwave read 2:47 p.m. In 3 hours, I'd have to start prepping for tonight's company dinner. Another performance. Another night of me smiling that empty smile while Sean's colleagues discussed markets I understood better than they did. Strategies I could have improved if anyone had ever bothered to ask my opinion, but they never did. Why would they? I was just Sean's pretty wife, his greatest achievement in taming a wild thing into submission. I climbed the stairs to our bedroom, my hand trailing along the banister Sean had picked because it photographed well. Everything in our New York penthouse was chosen for appearance, for the impression it would make on others, even me, especially me. In the walk-in closet, I pushed aside the rows of designer dresses Sean approved of and reached behind them to a hidden panel I'd had installed 2 years ago. Behind it was a small, dark space where I kept the last scraps of my former self. My MBA diploma from Wharton rolled up and tied with a string, my CPA certification, the business cards from Thorne Consulting, the firm I had built from nothing, and then surrendered for what I thought was love. A memory hit me. 3 years ago, standing in my business partner Michelle's office, signing the papers that transferred majority ownership to her. "This is temporary," Michelle had said, her eyes filled with worry. "You'll be back." But I had been so sure then, so convinced that Sean needed me to be less so he could be more. "It's embarrassing having my wife compete in my world," he'd said, after a client chose my proposal over his. "It makes me look weak. You understand, don't you, sweetheart?" Oh, I understood. I understood that loving Sean meant shrinking myself to fit the tiny box he'd allocated for me. I understood that his ego needed me to be diminished. I understood everything, except how much it would cost me. Pause for a second. Have you ever shrunk yourself for someone else? It's a terrifying feeling, isn't it? Losing pieces of who you are, one by one. We share stories like this every day to remind you never to let that happen. Subscribing is your first step to remembering who you are. Don't you want to see Jane get her revenge? Hit that button. Honestly, not subscribing is like telling Sean he's right. You don't want that, do you? Downstairs, I heard the terrace door slide open. Male voices in the foyer. They were leaving. I quickly closed the hidden panel and grabbed the navy dress Sean had approved for tonight. Conservative neckline, appropriate length. Expensive enough to reflect his success, but not so expensive as to suggest I had my own money. He didn't know about the trust fund my grandmother had left me. The one I had never touched. The one that sat gathering interest while I played the role of the financially dependent wife. "Jane," Sean's voice echoed up the stairs. "Come say goodbye to the boys." I came down the stairs, putting my vacant smile back on. George was waiting by the door, his eyes sliding over me with that casual assessment men like him feel entitled to. "Beautiful as always, Jane. Sean's a lucky man." "The luckiest," Sean agreed, pulling me against him with proprietary force. Though between us, it wasn't luck, just good training. More laughter. George clapped him on the shoulder and left. The second the door closed, Sean's face shifted to that critical look I knew so well. "Your laugh was a bit loud earlier. We've discussed this. Feminine, not bold. Tonight's important. Denzel Blackwell will be there with his wife, and I'm up for the partnership. I need you to be perfect." "Of course," I said, my voice pitched exactly where he liked it. "And remember the story," he continued, adjusting my necklace like I was a mannequin. "You pursued me. You were persistent. I gave in out of kindness. That's the narrative they know. That's what you reinforce. Can you handle that without making me look bad?" I just nodded. I didn't trust my voice. He kissed my forehead, a gesture that once felt tender, but now just felt like an owner branding his property. "Good girl. Start getting ready. We leave at 7 sharp. As he walked to his study, I stood alone in that vast, empty foyer, surrounded by the beautiful cage he had built for me. Tonight, he would tell his degrading story again. Tonight, his colleagues would laugh at my expense again. Tonight, I would smile and play the part. Again. Or would I? I climbed back upstairs, but this time with a different purpose. From the hidden panel, I pulled out my old laptop, the one Sean didn't know existed. As it powered on, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Possibility. My fingers flew across the keyboard with a forgotten confidence, logging into accounts I'd kept alive but dormant. Contact lists, client databases, financial records from Thorne Consulting. Everything was still there, waiting. Just like the woman I used to be, buried somewhere beneath Sean's creation. The clock showed 3:22 p.m., less than 4 hours until dinner, 4 hours to prepare for another performance. But as I closed the laptop and began to dress, I knew something had shifted. That moment on the terrace. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt. I'd learned to bury those. It was clarity. The simple, perfect understanding that I had been living as someone else's achievement long enough. Tonight would be different. Sean just wouldn't know it. Yet. Tonight, while I smiled and nodded, I would be taking notes. Not the kind to remember wives' names, the kind that would help me remember who I was. The navy dress slipped over my shoulders like armor disguised as silk. The valet took Sean's keys, and Sean's hand pressed against my lower back, guiding me into the restaurant. The pressure was firm, proprietary, the same way he'd steer an expensive car. Through the glass doors, I could already hear the sophisticated murmur of conversations, the ones that would soon include my degradation as entertainment. "Shoulders back," Sean murmured in my ear. "And remember, let me lead the conversation. Denzel's considering me for the Singapore project. I can't afford any distractions." The hostess lit up when she saw Sean. "Mr. Whitfield, your usual table is ready. Mr. and Mrs. Blackwell have already arrived." Her eyes skimmed right over me, like I was an expensive handbag. Maybe that's all I was. The restaurant hummed with that big money energy. Sean navigated us through the tables, his hand never leaving my back. I recognized faces from his firm, from charity events, from countless dinners where I had perfected the art of being present, but not prominent. Denzel Blackwell stood as we approached. His wife, Queen, remained seated. Her eyes assessed my dress, starting at my shoes and traveling slowly up. Her expression said exactly what she thought before she even said hello. The navy dress Sean had approved suddenly felt like a cheap costume. "Sean!" Denzel's handshake was firm, a little too long. "And the lovely Jane." The way he said lovely made it clear it was just a courtesy. "Queen, you look wonderful," I said, taking my seat. She was wearing Saint Laurent. I mentally calculated that her earrings alone cost more than Sean knew I had in my personal account. Thank you, dear, Queen replied, her smile not reaching her eyes. That's quite a classic dress. Code for boring. Unremarkable. Everything Sean wanted me to be. She doesn't need flash, Sean said, already signaling the waiter. Natural beauty and all that. He said it like he was defending a purchase. Our drinks arrived. A martini for me, exactly how Sean ordered it without asking. Whiskey neat for him and Denzel. White wine for Queen. The Mitchell account is a disaster, Denzel was saying. Not surprising, considering Tom's recent distractions. Sean laughed, a calculated sound to show he was in on the joke. I sipped my martini, letting their voices wash over me. Speaking of distractions, Denzel said, his attention suddenly turning to me like a spotlight. How did you two meet? I don't think I've ever heard the full story. My mouth opened, ready to tell the actual story. The conference where I'd presented on market strategies. Sean approaching me afterward, his business card trembling in his hand. But Sean's hand found my knee under the table. A warning squeeze. Silence. Oh, this is a good one, Sean said, his grin spreading like an oil slick. She wouldn't stop texting me. Persistent little thing. He laughed and Denzel joined in. I mean, we're talking dozens of messages a day. I'd wake up to novels about why we should get coffee. My fingers tightened on my glass. This wasn't just a lie. It was a complete demolition of history. I had never texted him first. He had pursued me for 6 months. She was obsessed, Sean continued, warming to his audience. Queen's expression had shifted from assessment to, was that pity? I felt bad saying no. You know how it is with desperate women. Sometimes charity is the kindest option. Sean, I said quietly, but he was too deep in his performance. The best part, he said, his hand now on my shoulder, presenting his evidence, is that now she follows me around like a puppy, goes wherever I go, does whatever I say. Guess I'm her best achievement, right, sweetheart? The words just hung there. Garrett laughed. Queen's smile was fixed, uncomfortable. Nearby tables had quieted down. My martini glass was perfectly steady. My smile never wavered. But inside, tectonic plates shifted. I saw our entire marriage reframed in that one awful moment. Every time he'd corrected me in public, every time he'd rewritten our history to make himself the hero and me the grateful little nothing. That's quite a story, Queen said, her voice carrying an edge. Isn't it? I said, my voice perfectly calibrated. Sean has such a gift for storytelling. He squeezed my shoulder, pleased. Well, Denzel said, every successful man needs a devoted woman behind him. Or beneath him, he added, with a laugh that made my skin crawl. The waiter arrived. A merciful interruption. I arranged my napkin in my lap, while my mind worked through calculations Sean couldn't imagine I was capable of. The trust fund he didn't know about. The business contacts he thought I'd abandoned. The parts of myself I had hidden so well, even I had almost forgotten them. Through the soup course, Denzel explained market volatility to me, using little words, like I was a child. Queen asked about my hobbies in that same tone. You're so lucky, Queen said as our entrees arrived. Sean taking care of everything. It must be so relaxing not to have to think too much. Exactly, Sean agreed before I could speak. She's much happier now that she doesn't have to worry about complicated things. Aren't you, sweetheart? I looked at him, really looked at him, the satisfied smile of a man who believed his own lies. He genuinely thought he had done me a favor. He genuinely believed I was nothing without him. The happiest, I said, raising my glass. By dessert, I had made my decision. Not in anger, not in hurt, but in perfect, cold clarity. Sean would never humiliate me again, not because I would stop him, but because I would stop being the woman he thought he'd created. The real Jane Thorne was still there, just waiting. The house was dead quiet, except for Sean's snoring. I waited 20 minutes, counting his breaths to make sure he was in that deep, whiskey-fueled sleep. The clock read 11:47 p.m. I slipped out of bed and into his home office. He called it his domain. Tonight, it was mine. The desk was locked, as always. He didn't know I'd made copies of his keys months ago. The bottom drawer opened with a soft click. Inside, beneath tax returns, I found the slim envelope I'd hidden there 3 years ago. The trust fund statement, $8.7 million. My grandmother's final gift, $8.7 million that he believed didn't exist. Beneath it, my Wharton MBA diploma, and 3 offer letters from Fortune 500 companies with salaries that dwarfed what Sean made. I had turned them all down for him. I moved to his computer. His password, our anniversary backward. He never imagined I'd figure it out. I navigated to the folders he thought were hidden, and what I found made my breath catch. Spreadsheets labeled personal security, systematic transfers from our joint accounts to an account only in his name. 50,000 here, 30,000 there, small enough to avoid alerts. Over the past 2 years, he had siphoned off nearly $400,000. My money, my inheritance from my father, which I had naively added to our joint savings, trusting him to manage it. The emails were worse. Conversations with his lawyer buddy discussing asset protection strategies. One message, 6 months old, read, "Need to ensure Jay remains financially dependent. Can't have her getting ideas. The moment they think they don't need us, they leave." This is sick. He's not just a narcissist, he's a full-blown thief. This is the kind of betrayal that destroys people. If this makes your blood boil, hit that subscribe button right now. Don't even think, just do it. We are building a community here that crushes people like Sean. If you just sit back and watch this without subscribing, you're part of the problem. You're letting him get away with it. Go to the comments and tell us why you'd ever defend that kind of behavior. As I'm reeling, my phone vibrates. The caller ID is a name I haven't seen in years. Michelle, my old business partner. "Janie." Her voice was slurred, a bar in the background. "I know it's late. I'm drunk, but I had to tell you something." "Michelle, what's wrong?" "I kept your name on the contracts, Janie. The big ones. Morrison Industries, the Hartley Group. You still own 40% of the firm." The room tilted. "What are you talking about?" "I never filed the transfer paperwork. I kept telling myself it was an oversight, but I knew. I knew he was destroying you, and I knew you'd need an escape route." She paused. "The firm is worth $12 million now, Janie. Your 40% is just sitting here, waiting for you to come back. You're still listed as co-founder. The door is open." She hung up. I sat there in the dark, my mind racing. Sean had been stealing from me, while I was sitting on a fortune he knew nothing about. The irony was suffocating. At 2 a.m., I was driving to an industrial district, storage unit 47B. I hadn't been here in over a year. I rolled up the metal door. Inside, illuminated by one bare bulb, sat the remains of my former life. Boxes labeled in my neat handwriting, awards, client files, garment bags holding my old business suits, Armani, Chanel, the armor of a woman who once commanded boardrooms. I opened a box. Entrepreneur of the Year, Jane Thorne. My fingers traced the name. It didn't even feel like mine. My old laptop was in the 3rd box. I powered it on. The screen flickered to life, a desktop frozen in time. Emails, proposals, strategic plans that had saved companies millions. At the bottom of the box was a birthday card from my mother. I hadn't spoken to her in 2 years, not since Sean convinced me she was toxic and jealous. The card was from my last birthday before the silence. Inside, she had written, "My darling girl, I hope someday you remember who you were before him. You were magnificent. You still are. Love, Mom." I sat on that concrete floor, surrounded by the evidence of the life I had abandoned, and felt something crack open, not break, crack open. This was proof that I had existed as a complete person before Sean. I loaded several boxes into my car, including the laptop and a black Saint Laurent suit that had always made me feel invincible. Back home, I hid everything. Sean was still snoring, oblivious. I slipped back into bed, my body cold but my mind on fire. He stirred, pulling me against him in that possessive embrace, even in his sleep. I lay there, feeling the weight of his arm like a shackle, and I began to plan. The next morning, I made his breakfast. 2 eggs, over easy. But my mind was on my 10 o'clock a.m. meeting. I told Sean I was getting my hair done. He nodded, scrolling through market reports, and handed me his credit card. "Don't go crazy," he said. The coffee shop where I met Maria Harrison was 20 miles from Sean's office, in a neighborhood he'd never visit. Maria's eyes widened when she saw me, then softened with pity. "Jane Thorne," she said, using my maiden name. "I wondered if I'd ever see you again." "I'm considering returning to consulting," I said. She leaned back. "Considering or deciding?" Your husband approached me last year, tried to pitch his firm. He was unprepared, arrogant. He actually told me that women-owned businesses like mine needed masculine strategic thinking to succeed. I had him escorted out. The coffee tasted bitter. Sean had never mentioned this. He didn't know you'd restructured my entire operation, Maria continued. When I mentioned your name, he laughed. He said you were playing at business before you met him. She reached across the table. Your mind saved my company, Jane. If you're really coming back, I have 3 projects waiting. Real money, real challenges. Interested? Yes, I said. After leaving Maria, I drove to a small office suite I'd leased under M. Thorne Consulting. It was simple, but it was mine. I spent an hour setting up a new laptop, purchased with my hidden funds. I opened new bank accounts, moving money from my trust. Piece by piece, I was building my escape. By noon, I was back home making Sean's lunch. That's when my phone rang. Queen Blackwell. Jane, darling, free for lunch tomorrow? Queen had never invited me anywhere without Sean. The next day, she was already on her second glass of wine. I need to tell you something, she said, no preamble. About Sean. 2 years ago, at the firm's Christmas party, I saw him with his secretary Sarah in the coat room. They weren't discussing reports. I assumed you knew. I thought you had one of those arrangements. Sarah. 23-year-old Sarah. I had trained her on Sean's coffee preferences. I didn't know, I said. Oh, honey. Her face crumbled. Garrett. Denzel. He says all the wives know and just pretend not to. It's standard procedure at the firm. Standard procedure. My husband's infidelity was standard procedure. Why are you telling me now? Queen signaled for another wine. Because last week, when he told that awful story about you chasing him, I saw your face, and I recognized something I see in my own mirror every morning. We sat in silence. 2 women trapped in similar cages. 3 days later, I was in a lawyer's office. Ms. Diaz. She wasn't what I expected. Kind eyes. She'd seen too many women in my position. I laid out everything. The trust fund, the business partnership, the stolen money, the affair, the degradation. She took notes, then said, I need to tell you something. This isn't Sean's first marriage. My breath caught. He was engaged 8 years ago. It ended with a sealed settlement. The woman's name was Rachel Morrison. I reached out to her discreetly. She couldn't say much, but she did say one thing. Tell her to document everything and leave before he breaks her completely. I wasn't the first. I was just the current one. Jane, Ms. Diaz said, between your trust fund, your partnership, and his financial deception, you have all the power here. The question is, what do you want? For the first time in 7 years, I asked myself that. I want to be free, I said, and I want him to know that I was never what he thought I was. Miss Diaz smiled. Then let's make that happen. That night, Sean pushed his plate away. This salmon is overcooked. I looked at the perfectly cooked fish, a perfect coral pink, just like I'd learned in my culinary program at Hyde Park, but I knew. I'll make you something else. Don't bother, he snapped. Maybe the club can manage a simple meal. He left. I sat there staring at the plate. The salmon was perfect. We both knew it. But perfection had become another weapon for him to use against me. The next morning, he found me reading a biography of Katharine Graham. Pretentious, he scoffed. You realize that requires actual business acumen, right? A bit ambitious for someone who never even finished college. I closed the book, my 3 degrees burning a hole in my chest. Then, 2 days later, my mother showed up at our door with a small suitcase. I had a feeling, she said, pulling me into an embrace that smelled like home. We sat in the kitchen, and the words just poured out. Oh, sweetheart, she said, her voice thick. What has he done to you? I kept your room exactly as you left it, your books, your desk. When you're ready to leave him, my door is open. No questions. Just knowing I had somewhere to go. It was everything. But the final piece of the puzzle came at the gym. Sarah, Sean's secretary, appeared beside me on the elliptical, wringing her hands. Mrs. Whitfield, Jane, I need to tell you something. It's about Mr. Whitfield. He's been sabotaging you. The gym sounds faded. What? I've heard him on calls, telling people you're unstable, that you have mental health issues. He turned down 3 job inquiries for you last month alone. He told them you couldn't handle the pressure. My knuckles went white on the machine. He had your professional emails redirected to his account, she rushed on. I saw him delete an invitation for you to speak at a women in business conference. He laughed about it. He told someone, she's nothing without me, and I'm making sure it stays that way. There's more, she said, tears in her eyes. He's been telling people at the firm that you're having a breakdown, setting up a narrative, so if you ever try to leave, no one will believe you or hire you. Okay, this is next level evil. This is sociopath level manipulation. He's not just controlling her. He's actively building a crazy wife narrative to destroy her reputation so no one will ever believe her. This is terrifying. If you're not subscribed by now, I have to ask, why? Do you enjoy watching the villain get set to win? Hit that button and join the side that gets justice. If you still won't, go to the comments and explain yourself. We're all waiting. After Sarah left, I sat in my car in the parking garage. This wasn't just diminishment. This was systematic destruction. That evening, I used skills from a coding course I'd taken and found the email forwarding rules on our home computer. There they were. Dozens of redirected messages, job offers, speaking engagements, former clients, all routed to Sean's account and deleted. One from a Fortune 500 CEO read, Jane, I've been trying to reach you for months. We have a senior strategy position that would be perfect for you. Please call. Dated 6 months ago. Deleted the same day. I documented everything, screenshots, copies. The betrayal was like ice in my chest. When Sean came down from his shower, I was in the kitchen. You look tense, he observed. Just tired, I said. Maybe you should take something for that, he suggested, his voice smooth. You've seemed unstable lately, emotional. I've been worried about your mental state. There it was, the narrative, being tested in our own kitchen. I smiled that empty smile. You're probably right. I should take better care of myself. While he settled in with his scotch, I slipped into the pantry and pulled out my new phone, the one he didn't know about. For the past week, I had been building my evidence portfolio. It had everything, screenshots of his financial transfers, audio recordings of his daily humiliations, our state with single-party consent. I'd checked with Ms. Diaz, written testimonies from Maria and even Queen, photos of my degrees, my trust fund, the partnership papers from Michelle, all backed up to 3 different cloud services. The next morning was Thursday, Country Club Day. I found Margaret Whitman and Jennifer Cross, the 2 biggest gossips at the club, already 2 mimosas deep. How's Sean? Margaret asked. I sighed, putting on my best worried wife face. He's been forgetting things. It's so strange. Yesterday, he insisted we met when he was at Harvard, but Sean went to state, and last week he told a client I never finished college when I have my MBA from Wharton. I think the stress is affecting his memory. Jennifer leaned in, her eyes wide. He's been confused about our finances, too, I added, lowering my voice. Moving money around. I found transfers he couldn't even explain. I'm trying to be supportive, but it's frightening. I knew that by 5 p.m. everyone would have heard. Sean's reputation for being sharp would have cracks all through it. That afternoon, Michelle called. It's official, full reinstatement, 40% stake, corner office is waiting. But here's the fun part. Remember Morrison Industries, Hartley Group, and Pembroke Financial? Sean's failed pitches from last year? Yeah. I've had informal conversations. They're very interested in working with someone who understands exactly where Sean's strategies went wrong, someone who can offer a corrective approach. My heart hammered. You want to target his failures. I want to offer better solutions, Michelle corrected, and I could hear the grin in her voice. The fact that it's also poetic justice is just a bonus. Morrison Industries wants to meet next week. Their CEO, James Morrison, specifically asked for you. After that call, I drove to Nordstrom. In the designer section, I found it. A black Oscar de la Renta gown. $12,000. I paid with my private credit card. Special occasion? The associate asked. You could say that. At home, I hung the dress in the back of the closet. The gala was in 5 days. Sean would be receiving his Partnership Achievement Award. He would stand at that podium, and he would probably tell his degrading little story one last time. But this time would be different. This time, when he called me his achievement, I would show everyone exactly whose achievement was about to be dismantled. Tuesday arrived. I spent the morning at my real office, reviewing the Morrison Industries contract, while Sean thought I was at the spa getting pretty for his big night. The Fairmont Hotel's ballroom was glittering. I arrived separately, claiming a nail appointment ran long. I needed those extra minutes to just breathe. When I walked in, wearing that black gown, heads turned. Not the polite glances I usually got. Double takes. Sean was near the bar, holding court. He hadn't seen me yet. Perfect. I went straight to Margaret. "Jane, my God, that dress," she breathed. "Thank you," I said, taking a champagne. "Sean doesn't know I bought it. He's been so confused about our finances lately, I didn't want to worry him." Jennifer popped up. "Is he still having those memory issues?" "It's getting worse," I sighed. "Last night he told David from accounting that I was his secretary before we married. Can you imagine? I was consulting for Fortune 500s. He seems to have completely rewritten history." They exchanged a look. "Got him." I moved on. James Harrison, the senior partner. "Jane," he said, looking puzzled. "You look different." "Thank you, James. I wanted to look my best. Though I do worry about Sean. The pressure. Did he tell you he's been calling my MBA program a hobby course? Wharton might be disappointed to hear their graduate degree described that way." James's eyebrows shot up. You went to Wharton?" "Class of 2014, graduated summa cum laude. But Sean, he prefers to forget. He's been telling people I never finished college. The stress has really affected his memory." I left him to process that and found Queen. She just watched me approach, anticipation in her eyes. "You're really doing it, aren't you?" she said quietly. "Good for you." The dinner bell chimed. Sean finally saw me as I approached our table. His eyes widened at the dress, then narrowed. "What are you wearing?" he hissed. "That's not what we discussed." "I thought you'd like it," I said calmly. "It's a special occasion." Finally, the moment arrived. The CEO announced the award. "Sean Whitfield." Sean rose to thunderous applause. He got to the podium, holding his crystal award. "Thank you," he began, with that false modesty I'd seen him practice. "I couldn't have done any of this without my wife, Jane." He found me, gesturing for me to stand. "She's been my biggest supporter. I often joke that I'm her greatest achievement." I stood up slowly. The entire ballroom went quiet. "Actually, Sean," I said, my voice carrying clearly across the room, "I have an announcement of my own." The silence was electric. Sean's smile froze. "I'm delighted to announce that Thorne Consulting is reopening." I let that land. "In fact, I've been running it successfully for the past month. We've already secured 3 major clients, including Morrison Industries, the Hartley Group, and Pembroke Financial." You could have heard a pin drop. Gasps rippled through the room. Those were all companies that had rejected Sean's proposals. Sean's face went white. "Jane, what are you— Oh, and that charming story you love to tell," I continued, my voice steady as steel. "Let me share the real version. You pursued me for 6 months after I gave a presentation your own CEO called revolutionary. You sent flowers to my office every day. You begged me for coffee 43 times. I have the emails. You called me the most intelligent woman you'd ever met. It's a shame you forgot that woman existed, the moment you thought you owned her." The ballroom was a held breath. Sean stood there, frozen. "I won't take up any more of your celebration," I said, gathering my clutch. "Congratulations on your achievement, Sean. I'm sure it will keep you company." I walked toward the exit. My heels clicked on the marble floor in the absolute, deafening silence. As I passed her table, Sarah, the secretary, mouthed, "Thank you." James Harrison, the senior partner, nodded with, "Was that respect?" And then, Queen Blackwell. She started clapping. Alone at first, then another person, and another. Scattered applause followed me right out the doors. Behind me, I heard Sean's voice crack through the microphone. "Jane, wait!" But I didn't wait. I had waited 7 years. That was enough. The doors closed behind me, cutting off the explosion of voices. The valet had my car waiting. I'd called ahead. As I drove away, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. For the first time in 7 years, the woman looking back was me. The city skyline stretched out before me from my new office windows. My phone sat on the desk. Sean's name had been appearing and disappearing all night. 17 missed calls, 17 voicemails. I pressed play on the first one. Jane, what the hell was that? Call me. Rage. The second, this is ridiculous. You embarrassed me. The fifth, please, just answer. We can work this out. The 10th, I'm sorry, okay? Is that what you want to hear? The last one from 4:47 a.m. Please, I need you. I deleted them all. Then I blocked his number. The silence that followed felt like the first breath of air after being underwater for too long. At 9 a.m., Ms. Diaz called. Process server delivered the papers an hour ago, at his office. How'd he react? Tried to refuse them. Then his lawyer called me. Daniel Reeves. Daniel. The same friend who'd helped him hide the assets. What did he say? That Sean wants to contest everything, so I sent him our evidence file. The financial transfers, the email intercepts, the recordings, everything. I could hear her smile. Daniel called back 10 minutes later, suggesting mediation. Within a week, Sean's world had crumbled. The firm launched an internal investigation after several partners' wives reported his comments about my mental stability. James Harrison personally called me to apologize, making it clear Sean's partnership track was permanently derailed. At the mediation, Sean sat across from me, looking gray. My client is prepared to walk away with only what she brought into the marriage, Ms. Diaz stated, plus her share of assets prior to Mr. Whitfield's unauthorized transfers. Sean's jaw clenched. She built that company during our marriage. I have rights. I spoke to him for the first time since the gala. Actually, I built it before we met. I maintained it during our marriage, and I rebuilt it despite your sabotage. You have no rights to anything I created. He just stared at me, like he was seeing me for the first time. He probably was. His lawyer whispered something, showing him the audio file where Sean outlined his plan to keep me dependent. Sean's shoulders just sagged. We accept the terms, his lawyer said. 3 months later, I stood in our expanded office space. We'd outgrown the first one in 6 weeks. Morrison Industries wants to increase their retainer, Michelle announced, popping a bottle of Dom. And guess who called this morning? Denzel Blackwell. He wants to jump ship from Sean's firm and bring his portfolio with him. What about Sean? Fired, or encouraged to pursue opportunities elsewhere. Apparently, his last few presentations were disastrous. Clients said he seemed distracted. She raised her glass. To karma. To freedom, I corrected. We drank. My phone buzzed. A text from a new number. It was Sean. I see now what I lost. 5 words. Reading them, I realized his fatal mistake. He thought he had lost me, like a set of keys. The truth was simpler. He had never known me at all. He had married a woman he immediately set about destroying, and now he was mourning the loss of a fantasy. I deleted the message. My degrees were hanging on my wall now, not hidden in a box. My mother visited that afternoon, bringing cookies for the staff. Sarah, my former secretary turned new executive assistant, knocked. Your 3:00 p.m. is here. James Harrison. James entered with a respectful nod, no condescension. Jane, thank you for seeing me. I have a proposition. As we talked, I caught my reflection in the window. A woman in a suit that fit, in her own office, building her own empire. The best revenge wasn't the gala, it wasn't the divorce, it was simpler. The best revenge was becoming myself again. Sean had called me his achievement, as if I were something he had crafted, but achievements aren't crafted by others. They're earned. And this one, this life, belonged to no one but me. Did this story of calculated revenge get your heart pounding? Hit that like button right now. My favorite part was when Jane stood up at that gala and calmly listed Sean's failed clients as her new ones. What was your most satisfying moment? Share it in the comments below. And if you want more stories of people reclaiming their power and turning the tables on those who wronged them, what are you waiting for? Subscribe and hit that notification bell. Not subscribing is basically telling the world you're cool with bullies like Sean. Don't be that person. Join us.